Good afternoon. Thanks everybody for joining us here today for our final webinar of this academic year, brought to you by Behavioral Economics in Action in Rotman in partnership with the Behaviorally Informed Organizations Partnership. Although we are meeting virtually, we wish to acknowledge the land on which the University of Toronto operates. For thousands of years, it has been the traditional land of the Huron-Wendat, the Seneca, and most recently, the Mississaugas of the Credit River. Today, this meeting place is still home to many Indigenous people from across Turtle Island, and we are grateful to have the opportunity to work on this land. My name is Matt Hilchey, a postdoctoral fellow with BEAR, and I'll be your moderator for today's webinar. Today, it's my pleasure to welcome our speaker, Ammaarah Martinus, Director of Policy, Research, and Analysis at the Western Cape Government in South Africa. Before I introduce our speaker, I would like to go over the ground rules for this webinar. Following my introduction, Ammaarah will deliver a 30 to 35-minute presentation. During this presentation, please submit questions for our speaker by clicking the Q&A tab at the top or bottom of your Zoom screen and typing it into the entry box. At the end of the talk, we'll have a question and answer session, during which I will select questions from the Q&A tab to ask our speaker. Without further ado, I'd like to introduce Ammaarah Martinus. Ammaarah Martinus is currently the Director of Policy, Research, and Analysis at the Western Cape Government in South Africa. In her role, she focuses on managing and implementing strategic programs in the social sector in the Western Cape, as well as innovative research and policy development. There, she leads the Behavioral Insights portfolio and has done extensive work in implementing and evaluating behaviorally informed programs and interventions within government with a view to scale. Her recent work includes scaling a growth mindset pilot to schools in the province and implementing a behaviorally informed smart water meter project during the recent water crisis in Cape Town. Thank you so much for being here with us today, Ammaarah. And if you're all set, you can take it away.
Perfect. Thanks so much, Matt. And hi to everybody on the call. I'm really pleased to be here today. And I will get straight into the presentation.
Who loved school, especially math.
Sorry, just give me a sec. Okay. So let me start. So basically what I'll be doing today is to really take you through some of the work that we've been doing in the Western Cape Government on how to actually embed behavioral insights projects in government, and particularly looking at how we've moved from pilot to scale, and really focusing on some of our learnings, our pitfalls, some of the takeaways that we've learned over the years. And so I think it's just important to share those with you as well. So I'm sure you've seen this map quite a few times over the past few webinars, perhaps. And I think the important part here is to really just see how the growth of behavioral science in public policy has actually mushroomed. And I think we've really been part of the process, not only since 2018, but quite a number of years before then. And I think it's important just to, what I really want to show with this is that how it's actually grown. And at the time that this map was put together by the OECD in 2018, we had about just over 200 organizations actually applying BI to public policy around the world. If we fast forward to today, we actually see that more than 400 organizations are actually doing this now. So I think it's really important just to highlight this. And I think that we've actually been doing this type of work for quite a number of years as well. So in terms of the work of the Western Cape Government and what we've been doing as a behavioral insights section or unit within the Department of the Premier, we were one of the first institutions to really adopt and implement behavioral insights in public policy. And BI was really born in 2012 out of a partnership with Ideas 42 and our local university here in the Western Cape, UCT. Furthermore, we sort of born, a brand was born in 2018 when we hosted a BI conference here in Cape Town, and we co-hosted that with the OECD. And in fact, Dilip was there as a speaker as well. So we were really privileged to really start our brand of behavioral insights in the Western Cape government with the slogan of behavioral insights for impactful change. And so I think when we think about our goal as a province and as a provincial government or regional government, we really want to increase the Western Cape government's capacity to use the principles of behavioral insights to really increase the effectiveness of programs to tackle social challenges. And I think that this is very important for us because of the where we find ourselves both within a low resource organization and country, but also within how we actually tackle inequality. And I think that this was really important for us to not only focus on what we think as the smaller things, which is equally as important, but I think it's just thinking about how you're rearranging supermarkets, how you're thinking about putting sort of healthier food to the front of the aisle rather than at the end of the shopping lane. For us, we needed to think about those socially intractable problems and those wicked problems as I've mentioned here. So since 2012, we've been doing a lot of work in a lot of different sectors. We've talked about BI in violence prevention, and so here it was really about how do we actually make weekends safe for young people. Our second sort of area was focused on environmental sustainability, and so this was particularly talking to climate change, energy efficiency, and this was particularly important in our water crisis that happened between 2017 and 2018 in Cape Town. The third area was looking at healthy lifestyles as well as active living, and so this was really looking within the Western Cape government officials and how we could actually reduce weight of our own officials, because a lot of us were adopting unhealthy practices, eating too much, not exercising, etc. And there was really a need for that level of intervention at that particular point. The fourth area is focused on education, and today I'll be talking a little bit about that and how we've actually done projects within the sector. Obviously, this is a huge area for us, and so this was a large focus area for the work that we've been doing over the past few years. The fifth area, of course, as all of you may know on the call, HIV infection rates is quite high within the country, and this was really an important task for us in terms of how do we actually use BI to create HIV awareness and focus on the health of those on treatment. So that just gives you a little bit of a snapshot of what we've been doing. So I want to move on to a specific project which Matt highlighted in his opening remarks, and it really is about how we were looking to cultivate a growth mindset in learners. And what I'm going to do with this is really take you through quite specific detail about how we moved from a pilot phase to scale and some of the challenges and experiences we've had. So really what this particular slide shows you is that, if we look in our own country, and this is specifically in our region, there are a lot of poor people that are not only poor, but they also suffer from multiple deprivations. So the multidimensional poverty index is made up of about 11 indicators focused on education, health, living environment, and economic opportunities. And so what we were looking at was looking at our profile, and that really comprised of young people who were looking at multiple deprivations of being poor, but also having low quality schooling, also probably coming from fragile families, and also have limited access to information, networks, and connectivity. And so this was an important profile for us to know so that we can actually respond appropriately. And just to give you a little bit of a sense of what this looks like in our particular region. So this is quite old data, but this is our official sort of census data coming out of 2011, where it showed that just under 23% of young people in our in the youth population were actually multidimensionally poor. So which means that not only were they poor, but they also had poor health and safety. They probably didn't have access to social networks, and they definitely probably didn't have access to good transport networks. So I think this was really what we were actually faced with at that particular time. So just a refresher in terms of what growth mindset is. So it's really a belief about one's own abilities, and that it runs on a continuum. So it basically, you either believe, if you have a fixed mindset, that you were born with specific abilities and you can't change it. So basically, if you don't know a maths problem, and if you struggle with maths, you are always going to struggle with maths, and you can't actually improve that capability. Whereas somebody with a growth mindset, you believe that you can actually grow your abilities through practice and through taking on different challenges. And so this was really what the growth mindset methodology was trying to say at that particular point. So we wanted to use this intervention of growth mindset to really shift the inequality dial. And as I showed you 2 slides ago, we are one of the most unequal countries in the world, and it was important for us to really show efforts towards not only looking at the hard skills, which is like maths and literacy, but also looking at those softer skills, which is often sort of seen as the social and emotional learning. And our theory of change was really about looking at, if we can improve social and emotional skills, then you will be able to improve learn academic outcomes. So what we thought, and our hypothesis was, that if you're teaching a growth mindset, it will improve learner attitudes towards learning. This will then increase effort and perseverance, and which will inevitably then move to improved academic outcomes. And so this was really what we based our sort of thoughts on. And we also looked at growth mindset in a range of sort of similar contexts, so ranging from Macedonia, Peru, and Indonesia. And what we found in Peru, which was really telling for us, was that about 50,000 students aged between 11 and 14 years old were taken through an intervention. And the intervention was a 90-minute session where students and teachers discussed an article on how your brains can grow. And this was really done by comparing standardized tests on maths and Spanish literacy, which was really, really interesting for us. And so the results was basically what moved us to actually say, okay, this is actually what we think would work in our current context. So in terms of their results, they had a 0.2 standard deviation increase in their test scores. And this was really profound for us, because it was the equivalent of having a parent with 2 or 3 more years of education. And I think all of us know on the call that this then means that my parents are more educated, which will then imply that I will have a better education. And so the third factor for us, which was almost like a no-brainer, was that it was cost-effective, super cost-effective. It was about 20 US cents per student, and even in our context and other sort of similar developing country contexts, this would be something very, very affordable per student. So then, giving you a little bit of background on what our intervention design looked like. This was also just to say that it was a partnership between ourselves as the Western Cape government, the World Bank, Embed, as well as UC Davis University in California. So the actual intervention design consisted of a baseline assessment. So it consisted of a maths assessment, a survey, and a puzzle. What we did with the maths assessment was actually to get one of our local service providers here working in the mathematical space to actually design this assessment for us. The survey and puzzle were designed with UC Davis University, and then what the actual intervention looked like was a 60-minute slot over 1 day. The intervention itself consisted of a treatment and a control group, and it comprised of 5 3-minute videos. And so these were all animated videos, and I am going to show you just a clip of this so that you can physically see what it actually looked like for the kids taking it. And we showed them sort of National Geographic videos as the control. And so this was done over a period of 3 days. We then did a reinforcement, which was really 45 minutes over 1 day, just really reiterating the facts that came out of those videos, so that they were also very clear in their own minds about what was coming out, and the messages really being sort of taken out of those 3 videos. We had another reinforcement, and the reason for this was that if you see basically from the first enforcement happened at the end of September, and we only did the next one at the middle of March. So in December, which is really our summer break, kids will definitely forget what they've learned and what they've seen in the previous year. And I think we really just wanted to reiterate those messages so that they don't actually forget it. And I mean, for those of us that have kids, I mean, we'll know that, kids are not going to remember things that they learned yesterday. And I mean, I think probably the same can be true for adults as well. So we really wanted to make sure that we are reinforcing those messages. Then we had an endline assessment, also comprising of those 3 elements: maths assessment, survey, and puzzle, also over 1 day in the next year. So in total, this intervention ran for about 8 months, running from sort of June, July of 2017, right up until mid-April 2018. In terms of the sample size, we had about 1,000 learners in the pilot study, and they were taken from low and no fee schools, predominantly from poor communities. We basically did the intervention on grades 3s and 4s, so that was in our primary school cohort, and we also had grade 8s and 9s as well. So I'm going to show you a video which basically tells you a little bit more about what
Chapter 1.
was shown.
Mojo discovers a secret about his brain. A secret that will change the way he looks at the world forever. Our story begins with Mojo, a friendly monster who loved school, especially math. Until one day, when something terrible happened. The math problems got harder. Nothing made sense anymore. Mojo had a devastating thought. He just wasn't smart enough for school. It seemed the only reasonable thing to do was pack his things and leave forever. Just then, he heard his friend Katie laughing. "Mojo, you can't just give up," she said. "I have no choice, Katie," said Mojo. "You're either born smart or you're not. And I realize today that I'm not." "Mojo, that's not how it works," said Katie. "Anyone can be smart. You just have to work at it." "Pfft, that's the most ridiculous thing I've ever heard," said Mojo. "It's not ridiculous, it's science," said Katie. "Neuroscientists studied the brain for years and discovered an incredible secret: that your brain is like a muscle. When you try challenging things, like those hard math problems, you're giving your brain the exercise it needs to get stronger, which makes you smarter." "Ooh, is that really true?" said Mojo. "Of course," said Katie. "It's like how when you were a baby, you didn't know how to talk. But you kept trying, exercising your brain, until one day you could." Mojo couldn't believe what he was hearing. If your brain was really like a muscle, did that mean anyone could become smarter? Even him? He turned to ask Katie, but just then, she had to be off to her next class. But maybe you can answer Mojo's question. What do you think? Can Mojo become smarter? What about you? Now that's an interesting question indeed.
So I think just looking at that particular video, while the kids really responded quite well, because it was an avatar, it wasn't sort of gendered in any way. So there wasn't a specific shape or face. And I think this really resonated even with the older group, which were grades 8s and 9s. I think they're looking at about 14 or 15 years old. That really did resonate with them. There was a challenge with the videos, but I'm going to pause that and tell you a little bit more about that. But I just wanted to kind of go into some of our outcomes. So in terms of the maths test, what we saw was that there was a 10% increase in maths marks. And this was an external service provider that actually did an independent maths test with all of the kids. And this was comparable to 2 to 4 months of catch up in math. And so this was really significant for us. We also took another sort of point where we looked at our term 1 results of the next year, which saw a 17% increase in the math mark. And so I think just to sort of give a little bit of a caveat here that this term marks were actually taken from the school, and so the stringency of marking would have probably been less than the sort of the private service provider that we got on board. So I think that the figures will probably be more towards the 10% increase than the 17%. So importantly though, this impact only held for learners who attended all 3 sessions. So what we did was, if they only attended 1 or 2 sessions, we actually took them out of the sample, just because it didn't make sense for us to include them, because they didn't actually get the dosage that was required. In terms of primary school outcomes, we did what we call the early grade math assessment, which was also done by an external service provider to really help us think through what this test might look like. Although there were positive results anecdotally, and so what the primary school kids had to do, they had to physically write a letter after they watched the videos to say what they thought about Mojo and what are some of the lessons coming out for them. But unfortunately, this was statistically insignificant, and so for us it was a little bit of a disappointment, and we thought about some of the explanations for this. And so the first one was really about unable to measure dosage, and I think this is important. I want to reiterate this, is that you can have the best sort of intervention, but if your target audience is not actually getting the right amount of dosage, the efficacy of the program might suffer. And so this is definitely what happened in our case. I think that we didn't have records of the attendance, and so this came back to an implementation sort of glitch, which we needed to then take up. The second thing, and as I said to you, some of the barriers coming out of the videos were language. What we found that, especially in the younger cohort, that language is an issue. So in South Africa, the main sort of language is not English. It's in the Western Cape. If I look at our own region, it is Afrikaans and isiXhosa. And so what we found is that when we were moving to scale, we actually needed to change the language of those videos and dub them into local languages. And I think this really helped us to think through how we can think about scale and some of the challenges that we faced in our pilot. I think the third thing was that we just hypothesized that it was probably just difficult to adjust young children's attitudes and behaviors. And I think that this is, one of the things that we needed to take away from this pilot, saying that, perhaps it's not the best cohort of kids to actually run the intervention with, even if it was successful in another context. And so this was very important for us to take up into the scaling. So what was our strategy then for how we actually embedded and sort of got growth mindset into government? And so the first sort of important group of target people that we wanted to really get to and stakeholders was policymakers. Of course, we needed to show that growth mindset and social and emotional learning as a concept can assist to show improvements in academic outcomes. And so we did this, and we had a proof of concept through our pilot. The second sort of piece of this was the learners, because they are the ones that essentially need to buy into the program. We needed to make sure that the videos were relatable. The facilitators that were then going to go into the scale-up phase were also somebody that they could relate to. They understood the content, and also to show them that they from similar backgrounds, similar ages. So the facilitators that we did get on board were 18 to 25 years old. So they were quite close in age to the learners that we were trying to target. And I think importantly for us was to show that even though you come from an impoverished community, that you are really not a product of your circumstances. And I think the third point was about one of our main stakeholders and the implementing agent, if you like, was the education department. So here we needed to provide them with assistance to be able to take this pilot to scale and also importantly embedded into the core curriculum. So now I'm going to just share with you a little bit of our learnings and takeaways. So this is kind of the how we did it. And I think these things are what we've learned over the years, what we've learned even in our newer projects, just that we can share, and I'm hoping that it will be useful for all of you on the call. So I think this picture really just sums it all up. You know, it's about you often think that you are in control of certain things, and then you realize actually I'm not in control of anything, especially in implementation, and especially in a low resource context. And I think that the point really for me is that even though everything might seem as though it's burning around you, I think it's important just to be able to say, you know, this is all okay. Change is what it is, and how to deal with this kind of adversity is critically important with any project. Nothing's ever going to go to plan, and so you need to just plan for that. And I think that that's very practical advice that I can share with you all today. So on the specifics in terms of what was actually required to land growth mindset in government. So we required a handover team. We had about 4 or 5 people who ran the initial piloting, including myself, to really ensure the fidelity of the program and really for continuity. And I think this is an important point because often we run a pilot and we then say, okay, cheers, I'm going to go, you can deal with this now in the implementation phase. And that will never really work ideally, because somewhere along the way, things will get muddled up and you won't have sort of the control to be able to say, look, this is how we thought about the program in the pilot, and we would like the fidelity of the program to remain. We also needed a team of trained, a team to really train our new facilitators on the growth mindset methodology. And so this is a very practical thing. So really looking at what to do in class. And again, here it's about, you know, what are these specific examples? So I'm going to show you a little bit about what we did. And I think it's important just to give you these scenarios so you can have a clear idea. So the first thing was really about trying to understand what the ideal scenario was. So for example, scenario 1 was where all learners basically had access to a PC or a laptop, and this was at the same time. So you would have enough individual access for everybody to really see the videos off of their computer or tablet. Second scenario is where learners are really split up and they would rotate. So it means that, you know, if I only have 20 laptops set up at a particular school, then I would have 20 kids at a time, let them go in and then rotate, but not at the same time, obviously. Then third scenario was sort of our less than ideal case, but if this is all that we have, then so be it. So we had a solution where we had one facilitator to guide the class to really talk about the growth mindset videos, and everybody would basically be sitting around this particular person. Then the second thing was really about, you know, really thinking through an implementation manual. And so this was critically important because even though we could, you know, lean on UC Davis and the World Bank, they wouldn't understand our context. And so what we needed to do as a team was really think about how we can compile our own implementation manual. And a member of my team actually put this together, really being very specific, having checklists for the teachers, checklists for the learners, step-by-step guides. And I think that this was critically important. So I'm going to talk about a couple of things which is really sort of looking at the nitty-gritty, right? So for us, really embedding ourselves into the implementing teams unit was very, very important. We needed to be seen as part of the team, not as an outsider. So one of the things that I've learned is that you really need to get to know and understand the business, right? The second thing is about, you know, this whole notion of buy-in and underestimating the importance of gaining buy-in. And I think that this is especially true right at the beginning. So even when you're just starting with a particular pilot, always thinking ahead about who's going to be the implementers and gaining the buy-in right from the start. So basically what we did was to start off with our champions, both political and administrative. And so what that means is that we had meetings with the Minister of Education, and got her buy-in. We then had a meeting with the head of Department for Education and got his buy-in. And so from the very beginning, they were on board. And so I think why I'm sort of raising this is that they can be your best sort of proponents of a particular program, but they can also be your worst opponents. And I think that this is important to really take stock of, because they are in a position to block your efforts, and then of course you won't be able to get what you need. I think sort of reiterating the fact that you have to put in the hard work in the pilot phase to really ensure that you retain the efficacy of the program in scale up. So really knowing who the implementing team is, knowing who they are, knowing what your school setup or whatever organizational setup is critical for any success. Then I think the one thing is, and I talked about this on the slides before, is that no matter what, you really need to make sure that the overall fidelity of your initial pilot remains. And so yes, a scale-up is never going to be exactly the same as a pilot program, but you need to be prepared to compromise, but not sort of compromise to the effect that you are compromising the fidelity of your program. I think the next point I want to share with you is about networks. And so what I found was that sometimes we don't want to share our network because it's something that we build up or our contacts. And I think this often is a little bit of a hurdle, because what we did was, even though Class Dojo, who made the videos, were kind of who we got in contact with through the World Bank, it's super important to actually share this kind of information so that they can be in direct contact with the people that actually put the pilot together. And I think that this is critically important. It also eliminates this idea of being a middleman. I think the next big point is about also, even if a pilot project has ended, make sure that you still allow room for consultation with your implementing partner, so that you can have that channel of communication open, you can have a trusted relationship, but of course making sure that you have those clear boundaries. So I will be able to provide support on X but not on Y. And I think that this also instills a sense of ownership on the side of the implementer. So they need to really own what comes out of the pilot so that it can actually be successful in their own space. And I think the last point on this side is about sustainability. And this is critically important for the project longevity. And so for us, what we thought about as very important was, how would we embed behavioral science, and in particular this project growth mindset, into the daily workings of the province. So what we did was we actually elevated growth mindset as part of the COVID-19 recovery plan, just because kids were obviously not going to school. They needed to deal with challenges that they've never done before. In fact, the growth mindset methodology was actually well suited to this particular challenge. We also made sure that all of our sort of project material and all of the indicators were embedded into the departmental planning and budgeting documents. And I think this is also very critical, because these documents live on for 3 or 5 years. And so you really guarantee that this particular pilot and project is embedded in the way that government actually works. So I want to leave you with a couple of takeaways. And I initially thought I'm going to have 4, but now, after sort of going through all of the challenges and successes that we've had, I've landed up with a few more. So just bear with me. So the first thing is about, making sure that we supplement and support existing programs. I think that's something that's critically important. The second is about considering the layer of policy intervention before starting a program. So does this particular program or project actually fit in with a broader strategic vision or direction? Can it fit under something else? I think this is critically important, so it's not seen as an add-on. I think the third thing is about partnerships, and I'm sure we all know on the call how important these are to not only pool resources, but also pool knowledge. And I think this is critical in the success of our program. I talked about the champion, and so we used our champions of the minister and our head of department for education, critical in any organization. So whether this is your CEO or your CFO or your HR manager, but whatever it is, I think the point is about having an internal champion. Then sufficient time. I think time is often, we sometimes overestimate, we know this working in the field, our time that we will have for implementation. And we often underestimate how long things actually take. And I think that this is critically important. So if I had done things a little bit differently, I probably would have allocated more time so that we could, iron out some of the kinks. I think the sixth thing is really about data. So, I mean, all of us here also know that having good, accessible, and robust data is very, very important for the success of any project. Then, if you're in a big organization, such as a government, or in fact, any IO, whatever it is, having the ability to really navigate your procurement and IT processes is important so that it doesn't become a hindrance, but rather helps you to get where you actually need to be. And then the last point is about, and I talked about this through the slides before, but really to be able to plan not only for your pilot, but also post-pilot, and to think about sustainable ways for scale up in order for this particular program that you intend to run to be embedded in your programs post-pilot. So I think that's really it from me. I'll leave my contact details there for a couple of minutes, but I'm sure that the organizers would also be very happy to share with you. So thanks very much, and thanks for listening.
Thanks so much. That was wonderful. I have a couple of questions here in the chat. I'm going to do them somewhat out of order, just so, okay, so I have one question, very simple. Just wants to be able to see again the slide with the different activities involved in the intervention again, please. So while you're doing that, or when that's up, I'll ask a different question, and then maybe we can sort out why that question is being asked.
Sure. Is this the intervention slide, this one?
Slide, different activities involved. I believe it's probably this one, but I can be corrected if I'm wrong about that. Let me just keep that up, and I'll ask a question while that's up here. This question comes from Jeremiah, and it's, what recommendations do you have for managing long-term implementation for an intervention that spans 8 months? That seems like a very specific question, but it's a longer-term implementation.
Okay. So just to be clear that I understand the question. So are we talking about post-pilot when moving to scale? Is that what you're referring to, Jeremiah?
I'll give Jeremiah a second to respond to that.
Mm-hmm. Otherwise, I could also just guess and just try to answer.
The answer to your question was yes.
Okay, cool. Okay, so look, this particular, and I didn't go into the specifics of how the scale-up intervention looked like, but what we found was that after this 2018 period, we then went into training. And so we did training as our first sort of point of entry into the education department to really think through, okay, how would this actually look like and what would we need? And so currently this project is still running. It is being phased out to 240 schools each year. We've already scaled up to 240 schools, and we are looking at implementation over a 5-year period. So essentially by the end of 2024, we would have reached all of our schools because that is the intention. So at the moment, we have about just over 1,500 schools with roughly between 800 to 1,000 learners each. So that's quite significant, and doing 240 schools each year is also quite ambitious. So I think that's our time frame in totality, but with the aim of reaching all the schools in our region. I hope that answers it.
Yeah, okay, that sounds great. Good outreach answer there. There's this is double barrel. There's a second part to this, and it's are there ways that you measured long-term results of the intervention? And the example is performance the same or improved in 2020 as compared to 2018?
Yeah. That's an excellent question. And so we've been working with a couple of people to really talk about process monitoring as like the one piece, but then also looking at impact monitoring. So running sort of impact evaluations. So because of COVID and because we almost used 2019 as a training year and handover year, we couldn't actually sort of start the program in its totality in terms of impact evaluations. So we are kind of at the beginning stages. What we wanted to do was, after a period of 2 years, actually measure properly. And so we haven't really come to that point as yet. And I think COVID really threw a spanner in the works, basically taking out 1 whole year. So this has been a little bit difficult, but it is on our sort of budgeting to actually have an impact evaluation. So I'm really excited for this particular part, because I would love to know whether that 10% actually will hold in a scaled up situation, and that we will only know after a period of time.
Okay. Just making sure I've got everything here. I have a couple questions that I'd like to have answered. So you were talking about successful ingredients that you need to be successful in these kinds of contexts. And I think one of those that you identified was embedding yourself into the implementing team's unit to be seen as part of the team. I think that in many cases, people might not be able to do that for a variety of different reasons. I understand the concept of, having the perception as being as part of the team, but if you can't embed yourself into that unit, what other strategies do you use?
Good point. Yeah, I think maybe embedding in this instance. So just to give people a bit of a sense of like what we look like here. So I don't have a BI unit. I sit in a policy unit, in a policy and strategy unit. So basically, BI forms one part of what I do, but it's not all of what I do. So my main job is really to develop policies and strategies, and also look at innovative topics for the entire province. And so why I'm telling you this is because that implies that I've got many other jobs to do. And so embedding for me means having a regular cup of coffee with someone. Making sure that when you have your meetings, go to their offices, spend some time there, get to know the staff within the team. So I'm very clear about, I don't just want to sort of speak to the director or to the HOD. I want to speak to the people that's actually implementing the project, because they are the people that will tell me whether the fidelity of the program is being held up or not. And so, having those sessions with almost the second layer of management or implementers are critically important. So when I say embed, that's what I mean. Making time for half an hour coffee, I mean, that's really nothing, going there, make it an effort to spend some time in the offices. Try to get an invite, to a conference. Spend some time, I mean, obviously in COVID, it's a bit different now, but, like around the water cooler, or like around the tea and coffee station, or whatever, lunch breaks. Those are the things that are subtle things, but actually make a world of difference. And you actually get to know the people that are implementing. And so I think that's what I meant when I said embed, because spending time with a unit and giving up your day job probably isn't going to work, but it is about thinking through strategies. Oh, okay, I need to get close to this one. How do I do that? Try and network more, go to conferences, spend some time, invite them to your stuff. And, it's all about relationships at the end of the day, and building those relationships so that if you need something, they are there. And if they need something, you are there. And I think that that's critically important.
Nice. Okay, so there were a lot of things that you said that I picked up on that I thought were very interesting. And another one that you said was partnerships must be used to pool resources and knowledge. And I couldn't agree more. But I did want a thought on something. So I'm just wondering, in some partnerships, you're working with a relatively large group of separate entities. each with unique objectives, let's say. And in some cases, I guess I'll ask you a more personal question. Have you ever been involved in a project in which you're working with multiple entities, some of which have misaligned interests, and then there's a reluctance to share information? And if the answer to that is yes, what strategies have you used to entice greater information sharing?
Yeah, no, thanks for that. And I've never been asked that, but I've always thought it, and I thought, like, when would somebody actually ask me that? And I think, the idea about partnerships is that they should be partnerships. So what that means is that it should be equal in everything. So whether it is sharing of resources, sharing of information, sharing of advice, strategy, having a real partner, and where things are not centered around money or resources or other sorts of things. And I think that's critically important. And yes, I've had an incident, or quite a few actually, where the partnerships were not aligned in terms of objectives. And I think that this is an important point. So for me, just from a very personal perspective, if the partnerships are not aligned with the values, both of the organization, but also as you as an individual, I think that is a problem. And I think that you have to recognize that, and you have to be big enough to say, you know what, yes, this is whoever it is, and it's, a big organization, but actually our values are not aligned. And, and so that's it. And I promise you that you will find a partner that's right for you. And it may not be the biggest, brightest star, but actually, they might be the best thing for that particular program. So I am not afraid of walking away from partnerships if they are not aligning with the value systems of the organizations and the value systems of what we have to offer as a team. So, when we are looking at partnerships, we are looking at partners who are really interested in the outcomes and less interested in the resources or the money or what I can do for them from a resource or a financial perspective. So that is one of the things that's critically important to me.
That makes a lot of sense to me. I was asking for a friend. It wasn't so personal, but thank you. Okay, so so many interesting things that you commented on. I like the one, being prepared to compromise on some pilot project elements, but not on the overall fidelity of your initial pilot. That sounds a lot easier said than done to me. Because I've certainly been involved in situations where I thought something was extremely critical to the success of a project, but could not secure a particular implementation. When you are getting a lot of pushback, and maybe you don't want to compromise, what is it that that you do?
So when I think about what I'm planning to do in the pilot phase, but also the vision for the scale up, right? So I'm always thinking, okay, so what's the next phase and what's the next phase? Because that's critically important. The one needs to feed off of each other. And so I almost have a set of things in my mind where I know I'm not going to budge on this. Like, these are the things, like, you have to play the videos, you have to do it in this way. These are the things that we are saying must be done in order for this program to work. And what I would do, like, this is again a very personal thing, but there's only 21 of you, so it's fine. So what I'm going to say is that working in government, and I'm sure this is across the globe, you have to deal with a lot of egos. You have to deal with a lot of difficult personalities to get the job done. But so you would have to be prepared to say, you will do X, but you won't do Y. And I think it's important to know this before you actually go into scale up, so that in your mind, okay, I can budge on, let's use projectors. That's fine. But I'm not going to budge on you doing the exercises after the videos. Because then, I've often said to the implementing arm, if this is what you're doing, this is not the pilot that we're at. And so if you want to do that, that's your thing. But unfortunately, I then need to step away. And I think it's important to be firm. I think that often we we might be so desperate for somebody to mainstream what we're doing, but then it means that they're actually not mainstreaming our project, they're mainstreaming something else. And so I think that is really something that I've been very clear about, and also very sort of strict about, because I think otherwise, like, what are we doing here, so, and I think just be honest. I mean, also it helps that I'm South African, so we are just very straightforward and direct by nature. But I think, that's what you have to do.
Let me just add to that a little bit. So I love your answer. But just to be clear, if I'm interpreting you correctly, you will either threaten or literally walk away from a project if it cannot be implemented with the fidelity that you have in mind.
Look, I'll obviously try to come to some compromise. I'm not hard-headed, but I think it's important to know what your boundaries are. So there are boundaries that can be pushed, and you need to know in your mind before you go into that conversation which boundaries they are. So then be clear. Okay, I'm willing to do this, but no more. And I can do this because that's okay, but you need to almost frame the conversation when you're in there, so using behavioral science to actually frame that conversation, to know, this is what I want. These are the things that are important to me. And that's it.
Yeah, totally agree. I just have a simple, I guess, operational question. I was trying to figure it out while I was listening to your implementation of the growth mindset stuff. How many different stakeholders were involved in the implementation of that project? I could see that you needed a significant tech team, I presume, amongst other things. How many people are we talking about in that particular, maybe not people, but like entities, if I can put it that way?
So it was actually a very small team. At the time, my team in particular was about 2, 3, 4, 5 people. And these were not sort of permanent staff. So like permanent staff was about 2 in addition to me. We did the tech ourselves. We basically had to get the tablets, load the stuff on. The World Bank helped us with sort of Qualtrics and that kind of stuff, but like nothing particularly difficult to do, I would say, but a lot of checking. So a lot of late nights, a lot of checking, is the information loaded on? Do the videos play? Do they work? So minute things, which actually takes a lot of time. So it was a very sort of labor intensive kind of pilot. I don't know if I would necessarily do it again this way. But it was also about how do we cut costs, and how do we actually take on some of that burden. And I think that's the approach that we took. We had a fieldwork team which helped us, but again, we needed to make sure that the data and the evidence that they were collecting was actually being done in a way that was quite efficient, and that they were actually doing the recording. And as you saw on the primary school side, this wasn't done as accurately as what you would have hoped. So attendance registers were not kept very well, and so this was very important for us as we were scaling up.
Okay, I think we'll do one more. I have a few left here, but I think we only have time for one more. And I want to end this one because I think it's important to a lot of people. How do you introduce the idea of behavioral insights to partners, perhaps especially those who are jejune or not necessarily at the same maturity as other people are in that kind of thing?
Yeah, that was from Melissa. I saw that. I still struggle with this, even though we've been doing this work since 2012. So every year I have to be like an introduction to behavioral science or masterclass on behavioral science. And in fact, we just ran one this week. And it really is a tough one because people often have this preconceived notion about BI or behavioral science or whatever you want to call it, often citing, it's like just, it's ad hoc stuff, it's little nudges here and there. And yes, sometimes it is that, but other times it's bigger things. And I think that one of the things that I've really done is this week, in fact, I had one of our partners out for the week, really looking at behavioral clinics where you actually take a problem that resonates with people and you go through a step-by-step process with them, trying to, like, even if they don't know BI, right, or as they've never been exposed, they will know that, personalizing that SMS to a young person is going to be beneficial to their program. And so even I think it's the application of behavioral science rather than the theory of behavioral science that really draws people in. And so it's about how can behavioral science help me to do my job better. And the theory, yes, we can teach them the theory, and the theory is very important. But if you're going to just focus on that, you're going to lose a lot of people. And so I've made a lot of the interventions we've done very practical. So you come with your problem to me. I'm not going to stage something and use an example from, the UK or wherever. That's not really contextually relevant to a South African context. I want you to come with your problem, and we sit down and see how we can use behavioral science to actually sort this particular issue out for you. And I think now, when I first started, I had 30 people coming to like a course. This week we had 105 people coming and staying for 2 hours. So this for me means that something is clicking somewhere. And as long as as long as you didn't say no to me, that means it's yes, in terms of I'm keen. So I'll work with that. And so for me, that's the strategy that we've been taking, and also making sure that when you are doing a project, involve people from the very, very beginning, and that they understand it and really transfer that skill.
Perfect answer. I got 3 minutes left here. I want to wrap it up, but I see there's Tim's question there. Do you have a 30-second response to that? So what made you choose a technological medium for this, the stories of Mojo? Quick answer? Is there a short answer for that?
Well, the World Bank presented it from, well, we needed to show the video, right? And the videos obviously resonated with us. And we thought that it could work because most of our schools were moving on to a sort of a broadband system. So we thought, okay, by the time that we actually do the pilot, the system would be up and running. Of course, it didn't work out that way, but that's all good because now all the schools do have connectivity. And if they don't, we have option 3. So in any case, I think it inspires you to be creative about your options, and actually it did work, and it does work. And even now the kids still love the videos. So yeah.
That was nice and short. Thank you. So I think we'll call it a wrap on that. Again, I'd like to thank you so much for leading our final webinar of this academic year. I think it's a very strong note to end on. I really enjoyed chatting with you. For everybody in the audience, full recording of this webinar will be made available on our website, and you can access it by clicking the side tab labeled Events and then clicking the sub-tab labeled Bear Webinar Series. Before I sign off today, I also want to make our audience aware that this coming May, as part of our Bear Speaker Series, we're going to be hearing from Katie Milkman, Olivier Saboni, and Cass Sunstein. You can learn more about and register for those exciting events on our website by visiting the events page. Thank you all so much for attending today. Look forward to hearing from you. It's going to be next season. Bye.
Thanks, Matt. Thanks, everybody. Bye.